What's going on, guys? Welcome back here to the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. I'm your host, Manny Maradiege, live today on July the 10th. I got another great show planned for you guys today around some more NFL topics, starting off with ESPN's top 10 running back rankings that I wanted to react to, give my thoughts on it. There were some surprises in there, so I thought I'd discuss that. Then another update on Brandon Aiyuk and his contract negotiations. What could be the repercussions of them potentially extending Brandon Aiyuk, or the flip side of that if they decided to move on. Then also we're going to talk about Aiden Hutchinson and his expectations for the Detroit Lions in 2024, talking about all the hype around the Detroit Lions and whether or not it's deserved. That and much more on today's show. Before I get started, I want to remind you guys, if you have any questions or comments, use the tip and donations link, gsmcpodcast.net. By using that link, I'm able to see your question or comment in my chat box, read it out loud, and that way get your guys' thoughts on anything that is said on today's show. It's a massive help for this network and this show as well, so please, if you guys would, use the tip and donations link, gsmcpodcast.net. But with that being said now, we can react to the top 10 running back rankings according to ESPN. This was released back on Monday. It's the fifth iteration of ESPN's positional rankings that come out around this time every year, or at least over the last 5 years, I should say. ESPN usually surveys NFL executives, coaches, scouts to give their input on how these rankings shake out for all these position groups that they do. Since then, I know the edge rushers, their top 10 list for the edge rushers have come out. Same with the defensive tackles. But the running backs definitely caught my eye just because there were some surprises on here. So the top 10 running backs, according to ESPN, go as followed. Number 1, Christian McCaffrey. No surprise there, obviously, with the kind of season that he had. Then at number 2, Breece Hall. After the season that he had, very impressive with the New York Jets. And already 25 and under for Breece Hall, now entering his 4th season, I believe. To be at number 2 already definitely surprised me, but that's how ESPN and all these executive coaches and scouts are feeling towards Breece Hall. So he was at number 2. Then at number 3, we have Nick Chubb. Number 4, we have Saquon Barkley, which I thought it was a little low for me. But I'll get into that a little bit later when we continue to talk about it. Then at number 5, we have Jonathan Taylor. Number 6 is Bijan Robinson. Number 7 is Josh Jacobs. Number 8 is Jahmyr Gibbs, who I didn't expect to see really any rookies on here, but Jahmyr Gibbs was on the Lions, was a better player, and became a more prominent contributor to the Lions' success as the year went on. But at number 8, if he had to be on here, that's a good spot for him, but that still caught my eye a little bit. Then at number 9, we have Derrick Henry. And number 10 is Travis Etienne. Some honorable mentions as well I thought I would mention here were DeAndre Swift, Joe Mixon, Alvin Kamara, James Cook, Isaiah Pacheco, Kenneth Walker, and Aaron Jones. And with these running back rankings, also, when you read the article, you have the rankings on there. You also have the highest ranking for some of the votes that they got. So some coaches, executives, or scouts would have had him at this position as their highest ranking. And I thought some of these were pretty interesting because Bijan's highest ranking was number 1 at some point by somebody who voted him number 1. Then Jonathan Taylor was at number 2 as his highest ranking. And the last one, Jahmyr Gibbs, got a vote as his highest ranking to be the number 3 running back in the NFL. Those 3 really just caught my eye, really, because Bijan, coming off of a rookie year. Jahmyr Gibbs, same thing. Jonathan Taylor has had a very good career so far. Last year, he was dealing with injuries, so to have his highest ranking be at number 2 puzzled me a little bit, but I can understand it a little bit as well. But back on, I guess, the biggest surprise for me was Breece Hall, going back to him. That was definitely the biggest surprise to me, and ESPN's Jeremy Fowler mentioned that various NFL executives actually consider Breece Hall to be the best running back under the age of 25, and that group includes some very talented running backs already, like Jahmyr Gibbs, Bijan, Kyron Williams, who I'm a big fan of, Kenneth Walker, and James Cook. A good amount of executives in the NFL consider Breece Hall the best out of the bunch. And just on that point, it's hard to argue with that. Considering all the circumstances and everything that Breece Hall has had to play through with the quarterback play, his injury, and then coming off of that injury looking more like himself, which is pretty remarkable because he had a serious knee injury, and then the following season that looked as close as you did to your first year. It's very, very impressive. But for right now, Breece Hall at a very young age still, now heading into this third or fourth year, I want to say, for him. The expectations this year are a lot more, not just for him, but for the entire Jets team, obviously, with Aaron Rodgers hopefully being healthy the majority of the time and getting better all over their team, all over the roster as well. Breece Hall is considered to be one of the main pieces of this entire thing, at least on the offensive side of the ball. And if you just look at last year to sort of give you an advanced look at what this running game could look like with Breece Hall, last year in 2023, obviously carrying this Jets team on his back pretty much after Aaron Rodgers went down. The passing game really wasn't anything close to what it could have been, so Breece Hall played a major role in just keeping the Jets relevant in a lot of these games. He finished with 994 yards, with 91 receiving yards, and 4 receiving touchdowns as well. 95 targets too. So he had a heavy workload in the receiving end of things and also from a carries point of view because he had 223 carries to go along with that. Then you look at his scrimmage yards, which you compare to some of the best running backs. If you compare it to the top of the top in terms of the running game, he had 1,585 scrimmage yards, which was fourth most in the NFL and only second most for running backs, only behind Christian McCaffrey. And you take all of those into consideration, all that information I just threw at you guys, and you remember that most of the time the Jets were playing from behind, and with the running game, that doesn't really mix. Obviously, when you want to run the ball a lot more throughout the duration of the game, it really helps and it really continues to excel at that point if you're up in games. You control the pace of the game, you're running it through all 4 quarters, but instead you're going down maybe 1 or 2 scores, and now you're forced to pass the ball a lot more. And you can only imagine what Breece Hall's numbers could have been if they would have been in a lot closer games and a lot maybe more blowouts or something like that last year with how good they were projected to be. He could have been right up there with some of the best, but unfortunately that didn't work out like that. So I think that the thought of how well Breece Hall could be with everyone's expectations of the Jets being so good this year, I think that's where we get Breece Hall being at number 2. But even so, I thought maybe Nick Chubb or Saquon could have just been ahead of him just based off this year. I know it would have been a hard push for Nick Chubb just because he got injured so early on in the season. I think only in the second week he got injured. But I thought Saquon could have been up there at number 2. Maybe just switch Saquon, put Saquon at number 2, Breece at number 3, and Nick Chubb at 4, because, again, Chubb, you're going off of reputation, it seems, that at this point for the running back rankings, because Chubb did miss the most of the season, if not all of it. So to have him at number 3, I'm assuming this is just based on reputation, and that is one thing. So that I probably would have been okay with them doing that, but the hype is real for Breece Hall. A lot of people are looking forward to him making that second jump in his 4th or 3rd year, which should happen if the Jets are good. I'm anticipating him being a major part of that. But also in terms of the running back rankings, I had to throw this out there. Najee Harris not even being on there as an honorable mention. Top 10, I probably wasn't expecting top 10, but Najee not being up there as a honorable mention at least is pretty crazy to me. Pretty disrespectful because of how he's recorded a 1,000-yard season in every year he's been in the NFL. Not a lot of running backs have done that in this day and age. With the state of the Pittsburgh Steelers offense, I thought he should have at least been considered. But that's usually what you get with the Steelers and their players in a national recognition sort of way. August Fest said, we talking fantasy football or just football? This is just the football rankings. These are just ESPN's regular NFL football rankings, not fantasy football. It came out this week. They've done a lot of the positional rankings already. I think they're up to 3 now. So, yeah, they're just talking based off of reputation in the NFL. So, I recommend you going to check it out. Maybe come back here and tell me if you agree with it. But Breece Hall at number 2 was definitely the biggest surprise for me, and Jahmyr Gibbs at number 8 and Jahmyr Gibbs at number 8 also for the season that he had. I thought he played well, but I don't know. Having a rookie in the top 10 already, maybe because the value on running backs isn't that great. I can understand it. Everyone's looking for the next best one, but I'd like to give some respect to the older running backs. I think there is some value there, but that's just me. That is the overall thoughts on the ESPN top 10 running back rankings. Let me know what you guys think of it. Go and check them out. Let me know what your guys' thoughts. Something I missed or something you don't agree on. Please let me know in the comments section of this video. But that'll wrap it up for that segment. We're going to move on to the first break of the show, and when we return, we're going to talk some more about Brandon Aiyuk and considering extending him and potentially losing out on some other players that could be in line for some contract extensions, or do you finally come to terms with moving on from Brandon Aiyuk, and are you content with the offense that you have after you've moved on from him? That is coming up after the first break. You're listening to the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign.
I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient, hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing sold out shows for 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown, get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, all this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the noose it fits, some losing shit, a stupid myth. You choose to live or choose to dip, you choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?
We are back here now on the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast to discuss some more on Brandon Aiyuk. This contract negotiation has had a lot of twists and turns to it, and now I'd like to see some of what the 49ers insiders are saying, because I assume they're the ones closest to the situation, always being around the team, obviously. So I thought it was interesting when NBC Sports Bay Area's 49ers insider Matt Mayoko, he brought up the idea of where he saw this extension being at right now and the probability of it being done. He believes that there's a 50-50 chance that an extension happens before week 1 in terms of what he's seen, what he's hearing on this situation, and just based on obviously everything we've seen on the national level with the posts on social media, the meetings that these guys had, his pivot interview, all those things wrapped into one. Still at 50-50, I think could be a little questionable, because I see it a little bit more in favor of Aiyuk not re-signing. But I think 50-50 is as good as it gets, really, at this point. If you're an optimistic 49ers fan, I don't think you can go higher than that. And the main reason why he believes this is because of this idea of making a choice right now for the 49ers, a long-term choice to secure the future of this team based on what you decide, obviously, right? So one choice, you decide to buy in, you decide to invest in on Brandon Aiyuk, pay him what he's looking for, $30 million, maybe a little bit more, give or take $1 million or $2 million, around the $30 million mark, a lot of money regardless, invested into Brandon Aiyuk for however long, 3-4 years, whatever it may be. you decide to go that way and buy in, having Brandon Aiyuk on that based on what he's earned, based on how well he has played, you give him that contract. But on the flip side of that, it could cost you some other players that Matt Mayoko brought up that are also in line for an extension real soon. Some of those guys are defensive back Deommodore Lenoir, Charvarius Ward, and linebacker Dre Greenlaw, and offensive guard Aaron Banks. All of them are getting closer to needing a contract extension, so it would be very beneficial for the 49ers to have that extra cap space to use on a variety of players rather than just one. But of course, on the flip side, you lose Brandon Aiyuk, you decide not to go that way, and now you have the money to pay these guys. But how much does that drop off? How much does that drop you in terms of talent and how talented this team is just overall, especially from an offensive standpoint when you have Aiyuk, Debo, George Kittle, Christian McCaffrey, obviously. You bring in Ricky Pearsall. This offense is looked at as a juggernaut. How many pegs does that drop them if they move on from Brandon Aiyuk? So that's really the conundrum that the 49ers are dealing with right now. Do they value, the whole, a more group idea of extending a lot more players or just keeping a very good, very talented wide receiver on their team? And it's also interesting if you look at other things that play into this, because another factor that could have a big say in how this turns out is Debo's contract. He signed a 3-year, $71.5 million deal in 2022. So in 2022, he signed it. Now, last year was the second year, and now 2024, by my calculations, would be the last year of this contract for Debo. So he's also in a contract year per se. So if you decide and agree with Brandon Aiyuk to play this year out on the 5th-year option, Debo's also on the last year of his contract. So technically, you could decide in the future between keeping Brandon and keeping Debo at that point in time. But I don't think that's something the 49ers want to do, and having to decide between keeping one of these guys, because that'll just get very ugly. Just not a good look for the 49ers if they decide between one of these guys. So I'm sure they want to avoid that, but that's something else to keep in mind. If after this season, if they move on from Brandon Aiyuk, it could be in major part because they want to extend Debo, and they probably should extend Debo if they're going to move on from Brandon Aiyuk to another contract extension after that. And how much money does he get? And of course, that's going to stir up a lot more if he gets another lucrative deal and people start comparing it to Brandon Aiyuk regarding paying him instead of Debo. You know how the whole situation goes, but that's something to keep in mind. And not to mention that Brock Purdy, barring a first really bad season or a season where he performs not up to his standards, I expect him to perform great again. I expect them to make the divisional round at least, probably the NFC Championship game. And if he does all of that, say they get back to a Super Bowl, Brock Purdy is eligible for an extension next year, and there's already been a lot of talk by the 49ers CEO about Brock Purdy, how willing he is to pay him, saying it's a great problem to have. And it shows that you have a great quarterback and probably a great team if that's a problem that you are facing. So he seemed very willing to pay Brock Purdy at that point. And if he has another great year, you can expect him to easily make over $50 million. Maybe reset the market the way it's going right now and how these other extensions play out. He could be getting north of $51 million at least, in my opinion. So having that and having Aiyuk on another deal, maybe potentially extending Debo after that, it's a lot, and it's spreading the 49ers pretty thin to where they're just going to have to make a tough choice. They're prolonging it right now, negotiating with Aiyuk and negotiating these things, but it's going to come to a point where you don't want to do everything last minute. It's something that they have to consider now as they get closer to training camp. And Mayoko really summed it up in his statement that he said when he was going over the decisions that the 49ers have to make. He said, at some point, if your roster is full of really good players, you can't continue to pay market value. It just doesn't work. And he's completely right. That's the downside of having great players. If you hit the lottery on a lot of good players, no one's hit the lottery bigger than the 49ers drafting Mr. Irrelevant and having him be this franchise quarterback. You're not going to see something like that for a very long time, so you got lucky there. You drafted Debo, and he turned out to be an absolute stud. Same thing with Brandon Aiyuk, George Kittle as well. You were able to bring in Christian McCaffrey. This window right now for a Super Bowl is getting a little bit close now. It's getting a little bit tight, especially with Kyle Shanahan being 0-3 in Super Bowls. Now you're getting to a point where you're going to have to make these decisions, having to not pay market value and maybe losing some of these guys. Mayoko summed it up perfectly. You can't continue to do that because it just doesn't work. So now the conversation almost shifts off of this and how the 49ers move on and how long this, Super Bowl window is for the 49ers. If they've been there multiple times now they're starting to consider moving on from some of these players. And then what does that say about maybe a wasted Super Bowl window for the 49ers, Kyle Shanahan, and all of that stuff? It just opens up another whole box of questions surrounding the 49ers. So if by some way you can agree with Brandon Aiyuk to keep him this year and have him play on that 5th-year deal, I think the pressure just increases tenfold, really, for the 49ers to at least win a Super Bowl. It sounds crazy to say, at least win a Super Bowl, but I think we're at that point with the 49ers because they've been there so many times and they've arguably had the best team in the NFL for this period to not win a single Super Bowl, and now you're going to have to move on from some of your players. It would look like a big missed opportunity from their standpoint. Lisa DiLorenzo says, are you talking about some other year of running back rankings? No, I was talking about this year's. This year's, it just started coming out this week, actually. Mondays was running backs, I think. What's today? Wednesday? Tuesdays was defensive tackles, and today was the edge rushers. So that's what I was talking about. Gibbs is the number 2 running back in the NFL. Nick Chubb shouldn't even be on the list. Will he even play this year? I don't know how his recovery's going, Nick Chubb. I know his knee was pretty severe. That knee injury was pretty severe. I was watching that game, and it didn't look good at all. Gibbs as the number 2 in the NFL, you would have to convince me a little bit for that. I think I'd have a couple guys in front of him. He could get to that point, but right now I can't see Gibbs as number 2. I can't say he's number 2 in my opinion. But he could get there. I like what I saw. I just need to see it a little bit more often. But more on the 49ers now, just to close out this subject here, with how Brandon Aiyuk and how this could go in the next few weeks, if they do decide to agree on something or not. The 5th-year salary for Brandon Aiyuk right now is looking to be about $14 million for 2024. So with how low that is and how he's already been away from the team, if you can agree with Aiyuk to play it out like that, I probably wouldn't expect him to show up to training camp that often, or if at all, because I feel like he would already feel like he's doing them a favor by playing out this 5th year on a low salary at $14 million. So I don't think he would want to play or want to partake in training camp if he's already doing them a solid and playing on a $14 million salary. But also, it's not looking all bad for Aiyuk. He said he wants to stay with the 49ers ideally, but if you look at it from a financial standpoint, if he does put it off until next offseason, he plays this year on the 5th-year option, then you wait until next year and you decide to really extend with the 49ers, or you just come to an agreement. Similar to L'Jarius Sneed, the 49ers might franchise tag Aiyuk next year to prevent him from hitting the open market, and then you work out a tag and trade, sort of like the Chiefs did with L'Jarius Sneed. They get something at least back for him, and they don't completely just lose him in free agency. That's something that Matt Mayoko also predicted would happen. He said that he could see the 49ers having Aiyuk play this year on that 5th-year deal, then tag him and trade him next year as well. That's probably as ideal as it could get right now for the 49ers. And for Brandon Aiyuk, if it does happen next offseason, yeah, it stinks that you have to wait, but at the same time, say CeeDee Lamb gets paid or somebody else gets paid as well, you sort of increase your market value a little bit more if you go out there, perform like you did this year or even better, and then after that, say CeeDee Lamb gets extended, he resets the market again maybe, or just gets $35 million. It gives you another reason to sort of bump up that number a little bit more with your next team. So that's something else that could benefit him as well. But for right now, and a 49ers insider, Matt Mayoko, me, are thinking that this is no better than a 50-50 chance right now that an extension is done for Brandon Aiyuk. I would say it's a little bit lower than that, but it's a lot of factors that play into this now. You're starting to think long-term in a macro sort of way rather than just micro and thinking about what is he valued at, should we just pay him that? It affects a lot more in terms of the makeup of this team and how good this 49ers team can be going forward, especially when we're talking Super Bowls. That's the goal right now for this 49ers team. They want to do that because of this Super Bowl window that they haven't taken advantage of. A decision like this could affect it a lot going forward in the future. So that's where it stands right now with Brandon Aiyuk. If there's anything else that happens, I will gladly talk about it on the show. But for right now, we're going to move on to another NFC team, this time being the Detroit Lions. Their star pass rusher, Aiden Hutchinson, talked about the expectations heading into 2024, all the hype that's been surrounding the Detroit Lions. Is it deserved? What are Aiden Hutchinson's thoughts on it? I will provide those when we return after this short break.
Looking for your daily fix of sports talk without having to pay for it? GSMC Sports Network is available on YouTube. Just search GSMC Sports Network. Get your fix of daily sports talk shows on YouTube, absolutely free. NFL, college football, NBA, MLB, MMA, UFC, fantasy football, and so much more. GSMC Sports Network has shows running all day long, with new sports shows starting every 2 hours. Just like on your favorite cable sports channel, except GSMC Sports Network is absolutely free. Just search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube to catch one of your new favorite shows, like the GSMC College Football Podcast, Chip Shot Football Podcast, Hoops and Heels Women's Sports Podcast, GSMC Basketball Podcast, and so many more. Check it out for yourself. GSMC Sports Network, now available on YouTube absolutely free. Search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube right now.
Jumping right back into the action on the show, talking some Detroit Lions, a very historic season this past year for the Lions. Dan Campbell, their general manager Brad Holmes, and all the work that they've done. They were able to bring Detroit back to their glory days, and it's been a while since that's been the case because off of this historic season, they broke a 30-year NFC North drought. They last won the division in 1993, so they broke that streak, and they also broke a streak of not making the playoffs at all, with obviously making it this past year. So, like I mentioned, Dan Campbell, general manager Brad Holmes have done an exceptional job of adding a mix of veterans, drafting formidable young players to add to this, and have a great mix of, players just on this team that add a lot and buy in really to what Dan Campbell's all about, buy into how he is as a person. I'm sure anyone that knows Dan Campbell, that has seen his interviews, know how intense he can get and how committed he really is to this team. They've done a great job of finding the players to fit that, and that's why they're so successful. That's why they have been so successful building this team up from not even the ground, below the ground, all the way up to where they are right now. And one of those players that they drafted, one of those players that is the cornerstone of all of this, has been Aiden Hutchinson. They drafted him, and now he has really developed really fast into one of the top edge rushers, I believe, in the NFL. And he touched on the expectations. Now there seems to be a lot of hype around the Lions. Now, in just a blink of an eye, from one year to the next, they are one of the top powerhouses in the NFC. And he talked about, embracing that. What are his thoughts on all the hype around the Detroit Lions at this moment? And he brought up, that's for a later segment, he brought up this statement. He said, it's unreal. There's a lot of hype coming into this year, but I think it's well-deserved hype. I think a lot more guys on our team understand what this year is, and we understand what we got, and we're all ready. That's what Aiden Hutchinson said, plain and simple. The hype that has just really come out of nowhere for this Detroit Lions team has pretty much snuck up, I think, on a lot of people that really weren't all in on the Lions. Some people might have thought it was corny what Dan Campbell said at the beginning. This guy's not going to be a successful head coach. He's doing too much. But you see how it all changes by really having a plan, going in there and really wanting to commit to changing the narrative around this team. They've done a great job of doing that. And now with this hype, like Aiden Hutchinson said, I also think it's well-deserved, with just based off that hard work again by Dan Campbell, Brad Holmes, and just the players as well. They got a lot of good young players. We just finished talking about Jahmyr Gibbs in the chat box. Maybe not number 2 right now in my opinion, but he is emerging as a great young running back to really contribute to this team. He could arguably be the face of this offense if he really takes that next step in his second year. You have Amon-Ra St. Brown, who is again another young wide receiver. Jared Goff looked at as the veteran like that, so you have Jared Goff leading his team, Amon-Ra St. Brown, Sam Laporta. I think he was a rookie last year, so that's just another great player that has stepped in right away and been a major force to the whole team as they have performed last year. On the defensive side of the ball, Hutchinson, Brian Branch, these guys right away that have stepped into this role of just really being the faces of where they are right now, and the identity of this Lions team, I think, says a lot. Penei Sewell is another one I failed to mention just because he's an offensive lineman. He should get a lot of praise for already being considered one of the best offensive tackles in the NFL. That's where the Lions are right now. That's where the Lions are right now in terms of executing, buying into all this hype, and having all these expectations. It seems surreal, but that's just the NFL. You have a game plan, you execute it as well as they do. Now, how do you respond to that? It's almost funny because the Lions have been here similarly before, back in 2014. They were 11-5 that year, like they were this year, and they earned themselves a wild card spot. But after 2014, it never really blossomed into anything. It was almost just like catching lightning in a bottle. That one year they were very good, but then after that they fell right back down, and there was no expectations around them. Nobody really took them seriously. Entering a time with Aaron Rodgers with the Packers and how dominant they were during that time. So that's what you had really with the Lions, and that's why I believe some people were talking about hype, and I think the hype comes from a national standpoint, but there's more caution with the local people in Detroit around this team that have really been there through all the tough times. I think they approach these expectations now in 2024 with a lot more caution than what the national opinion says about the Lions, because of the fact that they've been here before in 2014, but also it's similar to a point that Jared Goff made, and I talked about it on the show a while ago, months back, on how Jared Goff mentioned that the local media, the local press in Detroit really keeps looking at the Lions as the underdogs, not really buying 100% that they are a good team. And I think Aiden Hutchinson is saying the same thing, that this isn't just all hype. This isn't just all one season. It's not going to go away next year and they're going to go back to being the same old Lions. I think him, like Jared Goff said in that interview in that point in time, that they are a legitimate team and they shouldn't be looked at as the underdogs anymore. They could have that mentality, I'm sure some players do, but there's no way that they are heading into games against the Packers, against the Seahawks, against these other teams, the Rams, the Cowboys, as legitimate underdogs. I think they're probably a top 3 team in the NFC right now. You look at the 49ers, the Eagles, and then it's probably the Lions. I don't think I would take any other team ahead of them at this point in time, and I also don't think it's just a fluke. Also, with the idea that this sort of happened in 2014, I think they've done a better job of building this team up more through free agency. We saw them trade for a defensive back in Carlton Davis, arguably probably the best or second best corner on the Tampa Bay Bucks. They brought him in, and also having another great draft really just hammers it down to me that they are really building a great team, because they drafted Terrion Arnold, they drafted Rakestraw another defensive back as well to build on the very good draft class that they had last year. Now they have another one. It makes me believe more and more that this team is building for the future rather than just a couple of years where they're going to be good. So that's where the Lions stand right now. And with this hype, with the idea of having now playoff success and expecting them to make a deep playoff run, what would be, a disappointment now for the Detroit Lions? There's a lot of stock now being bought into the Lions, and what are we considering a disappointment now? At what point has this Lions team reached to where we can say maybe an NFC championship game, anything less than that is a disappointment, or are they still at a spot where the divisional round would be the best case scenario for some teams? I thought that was pretty curious to think about because last year they made it to the NFC championship game and they were dominating in that game, dominating the 49ers. When you saw them go up, I think it was 3 scores at one point, maybe 4, and just how dominant they were in the running game, I thought, wow, they really just came into San Francisco and just stomped all over the 49ers. I had no inclination or anything. Nothing about that first half told me that the 49ers were going to have any chance of coming back, but as sure as heck they did, and they won the game. But I think the Lions showed me a lot in that game. They definitely showed me their inexperience for giving the game away like that. If you have that big of a lead in the NFC Championship game, there's no reason why you should be giving it up. But they showed me a lot, not being scared of the moment, really going out there and attacking the 49ers, not being afraid. With all the young players that I mentioned that they have on their team, they really took it to the 49ers, a experienced head coach and an experienced team of being in those games a lot, especially at home for the Lions, to walk in there and just bully them on their home field, I think says a lot. So with that being a big reason for this point, I think a disappointment for me probably would be not reaching the NFC Championship game, just because they got there last year, and it's not like they just got there and got stomped, like I just finished saying. They got there and really showed me that they could win a game like that. So, to me, if they don't reach the NFC Championship game this year with how much better they got, more experience for those young guys that make up this team, I think that's what I would classify as a major disappointment. And it's crazy to say, just because the Lions, haven't really been here too long, but I think they've done a great job of building this team. It really put it into perspective on how significant this jump could be when Dan Campbell said after the press conference, after the NFC Championship game, really just being as clear as you could be, saying that this could be maybe the only time they ever come back here again for this group of guys. And I thought that spoke very loudly to just how real and how serious a game like this could be, and how much it does mean for a team like this to already reach that summit. If you really think about it, that could be the only time they ever reach that, with how good the Eagles are, the 49ers are, and some other teams coming up as well. But with all that being said, I think that'll only motivate the Lions. I really am buying into what they're doing. I didn't hate the Jared Goff extension either. I know some people had some questions about it, not really believing in Jared Goff too much, but I think with this team, he fits them perfectly. All the hype that is being, circled around them, I think is well-deserved as well. So if they don't get to the NFC Championship game with all that hype, I think that would be a disappointment, but I think they've given themselves a very good shot of doing that at the end of the day. And also, just a bit of information to show you guys how much this actually is significant for the Lions. Excuse me. If the Lions make the playoffs again for a consecutive time this year, it'll be the first time they've done that since 1994 and 1995. And to get even crazier, if we're talking, a lot further back in history, if they win the NFC North again, it'd be the first time they've done that since 1953 and 1954. So, again, the Lions have rarely been in these situations. Just forget about making the playoffs. Consecutive playoff appearances, they haven't done that in nearly 30 years. So that's what it means right now for the Lions. I think I bought into that against all the stats and all the information against the Lions. I don't think this is the same old Lions. It's exciting to see. having a new team just pop into the playoff picture. I'm really looking forward to those games. Hopefully there's a rematch in there with the 49ers or even a Packers game. But that's where I think the Lions stand right now. That's the level I think they are right now, where I can say the NFC Championship game. If they fail to reach that, I think that's a disappointment. But let me know what you guys think about that and where you guys have the Lions ranking in the NFC. But we're going to move on to some other segments on today's show. When we return from the break, we're going to talk about the Jaguars owner, Shad Khan, talking about his strategy on how he prefers to build this team over free agency. He had some pretty interesting things to say about that. And also Joe Burrow giving a suggestion on how to implement an 18-game regular season and how that affects the Pro Bowl, and adding another bye week as well in there. So we're going to touch on those two segments after this break. Don't go anywhere.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
Welcome back here to the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast to talk about the Jacksonville Jaguars. What have they been doing so far this offseason? Of course, the major headlines are the extension that they gave to Trevor Lawrence, but I think apart from that, to give them their credit, to give them their flowers, they've done a pretty nice job to add to this team through free agency, which a lot of teams, I think, don't take advantage of it, in the matter that the Jaguars have taken advantage of it so far, because you think over the last couple of off seasons and how much they've changed by adding a wide receiver like Christian Kirk, Evan Ingram, guard Brandon Sheriff, linebacker Aiyuk Khan, to become very solid pieces of their team. And then you look at this offseason, they've added guys like Gabe Davis, Mitch Morse, offensive guard Ezra Cleveland, and pass rusher Eric Armstead as well. Very active, very proactive actually in free agency so far. And that could be looked at as a good thing. You know, I just praised it. Not a lot of teams do it. I think more teams should do it. But it isn't the idea that their owner, Shad Khan, really has in mind on how he truly wants to build this team. I believe that's what you have to do to build around a number one overall quarterback, in my opinion, in Trevor Lawrence, especially after you paid him that much. But like I mentioned, their owner, Shad Khan, is not really looking at free agency too much. He's looking more so at player development, developing the guys that they've drafted, developing the players in-house, per se, as it has been said on other occasions. So he actually had an interesting quote to say about it that I thought I would bring up on here. Their owner, Shad Khan, said, "Our solution isn't going to be we're going to be signing free agents every year. We don't have the ability. Bottom line is that young talent has to be developed. The coaching staff, their priorities have to change. Their mindset has to change. That's where we're going to get our future players. We cannot have this addiction to free agents." And he was pretty clear about it, pretty emphatic, I would go as far as to say, about how he really wants to build this team with the Jaguars and how they've drafted, and talking about some of the players that they have developed. I think they've been very successful in that department as well. You look at Trevor Lawrence, obviously probably their most successful one. Josh Allen, another one, just got him paid, and he's slowly emerging into that top pass rusher category. Also, Travis Etienne, after his 1,000-yard season, he is coming along very nicely as a top running back. You look at Trayvon Walker, had a better year last year. Devin Lloyd, the linebacker that they drafted as well. And now this year, Brian Thomas, who I think is going to be very good for them. But you don't truly know how that rookie's going to play out, obviously, until he gets through the season, and then you could really evaluate him off of that. But I like how they drafted him, especially after losing Calvin Ridley, bringing in Brian Thomas. I thought was a good replacement, but we just have to see and have to emphasize that development if they could do it the right way. But now, with talking about player development and talking about how Shad Khan wants to do this, it makes me think almost of the 49ers in a way, because talking about free agents and paying top money for some of these guys to come in and investing a lot of money, market value in a lot of these guys, it makes me think of the 49ers because they also have to pay a lot of times all these great players that they have market value to keep them on this team and to keep them in a situation where they are a top team in the NFC. It seems like the Jaguars want to avoid that and want to really take advantage of the players that they've drafted because, one, it's definitely cheaper, and two, if you develop them, you really get to see that behind-the-scenes process, the behind-the-scenes of just how they are as people, knowing what you have in that player, and really getting a better understanding of that value rather than overspending and being uncertain about bringing in a free agent, just being rushed through that entire process. You're never really too sure how that will all really turn out unless you really know them on a personal level. And I think that way, that mindset is the right mindset to have for Shad Khan, but at the same time, I thought it was interesting talking about player development now with Trevor Lawrence. Now going back to that contract because it is so significant, I believe. With having such a big commitment to Trevor, Shad Khan said that he was comfortable doing it because of his trust in the coaches, and he said he wouldn't go ahead with giving Trevor Lawrence his extension because, or unless the coaches really told him why they wanted to keep Trevor Lawrence and why they believed he was their quarterback going into the future. He, obviously gave the go-ahead. They extended Trevor Lawrence. But now, talking about player development, it makes me think of the idea of how this extension and now really going into this period where you have to take advantage of this because it's going to look very bad if you pay him all this money and you're stuck still in the same position. How does that line up, this win now mode that you're in right now, or I guess over the next 5 to 4 years with Trevor Lawrence's contract? How does that line up with the players that you are trying to develop, like Shad Khan mentions, like these players I mentioned right now? I think the closest one to being a finished product and going right in line with Trevor Lawrence on this contract that he's on right now would probably be Josh Allen. I think he's already stepped into that window where people are really considering him as a top pass rusher, so he's right up there. But then everybody else that they've drafted and that they want to develop and they want to have as crucial pieces to this puzzle are still in a very early stage where you don't really truly know how good of a player they're going to be or just if they're going to continue to grow at that rate. Like Trayvon Walker, you've seen some improvement out of him, but you can only really hope that he continues that going forward as a number one overall pick as well. You think it could happen, but you're also not really too sure. You look at Devin Lloyd as well. To be at such a important piece on that defensive side of the ball as a linebacker, to know that he's going to take that second-year step and grow that much more is another, 50-50, 60-40 chance that you're not really too sure upon right now. Then Travis Etienne, he had a great year last year, but how does that wear and tear, how much of a toll has that taken on his body? Can they find some way to keep him healthy the entire year? Because last year he got hurt, and then that offense really started stuttering. And that's why they went on that losing skid towards the end of the year, and they missed out on the playoffs. And on that point, when they missed the playoffs and when they had that meltdown, Shad Khan referred to it as an organization failure. So now that financial pressure and Khan wanting to hold back on free agent spendings, you almost think that the expectations for 2024 will be a little bit greater. There'll be a little bit more pressure, I guess you could say, in simpler terms, in 2024, because if you're not going to go out and improve upon with free agency, because Shad Khan just doesn't want to become addicted to it like he says, you're going to have to rely on this player development and really be in a situation where you're not really going to get too much help consistently from free agency if your owner doesn't want to buy in or go down that route as well. That says a lot about his trust in the coaches and everything like that, but at what point do you just believe that these players are going to go right in line with this contract that Trevor Lawrence is on? Once you pay him in, you're ready to, be judged, be graded on this team right away. If you pay your quarterback that much, you're pretty much saying that you really believe that this guy, you're ready to take that next step and step into contention with some of the best teams in the AFC. And right now, to say that, or to give that contract and to say something like this by Shad Khan, their owner, it puts a little bit more pressure, I think, on the Jaguars now, because you're really relying on these young players to be the guys going forward, to not look so much for outside help. Even if they do mediocre, again, I guess you could say like last year, Shad Khan doesn't seem like he's going to want to spend on free agency too much next year. So these guys are really the ones you're rolling with, and you're going to have to hope really and put a lot of work in to develop them as fast as possible. And it's not to say that they can't do it, but I just have a little bit of uncertainty on whether or where these guys are along their path of becoming very prominent pieces, very good pieces at their positions to take the Jaguars to that next level. But the training camp's going to take a big toll on that, preseason, and then just before you know, we're rolling into this regular season. And this Jaguars team, I think, could either be surprisingly good or really disappoint again in 2024. So it's teetering right now. It's 50-50 for me with the Jaguars and what they're thinking. But that's what their owner is believing that they have to do going forward, and that's how they have this prolonged success in his opinion. But we're going to talk about one more segment after this. We're going to head into a quick break, and once we return, we're going to talk about Joe Burrow and just his suggestion on an 18-game regular season. How does he hope it plays out, and what are some possibilities that could come after, and if this, consideration for an 18-game regular season is actually taken seriously. We'll be right back after this short break to talk some more about what Joe Burrow said on what he looks at an 18-game regular season looking like. Thank you for joining me here on the last segment of today's show, and we're talking some more about the 18-game regular season. Almost seems like a foregone conclusion now. Only a matter of time before this actually starts to gain some more traction. Right now it's still talks and anticipations and projections around what it could look like, but this goes off of some reports that claim that some of the members of the NFLPA actually are already anticipating those conversations in the near future with the NFL, with Roger Goodell, about really hammering in and ironing out these details about actually going through with an 18-game regular season. And off of that, we've already seen some reactions from some players in the NFL, like Brock Purdy being indifferent about it, Nick Chubb really not being a fan of it, Ryan Kelly, the center for the Indianapolis Colts, a member of the NFLPA, or, he basically said It all sounds nice, right, when Roger Goodell's talking about it, but he really didn't seem like too big a fan of adding another game to the season already. Then you got guys like Minkah Fitzpatrick also not being too big of a fan of it. Fellow Steelers safety Deshaun Elliott really going in on the NFL for not paying them enough to play another game. So it seems like the general feeling isn't too positive right now. But one player that really wasn't too opposed to it at this point has been Cincinnati quarterback Joe Burrow. He's one of the players that hasn't been so opposed to the idea of this change. A few weeks ago, maybe a month now or so, he brought up the idea of adding a second bye week to a potential 18-game regular season. A while back ago, he mentioned it, and I talked about it briefly. And then with another bye week, it'll push the Super Bowl back another week, and then you have the illustrious Super Bowl on the weekend of President's Day. So the following day, you don't have to go to work, and it's a win for everybody, right? Everybody watching the Super Bowl, wanting to stay up late. You don't have to go to work the next day. What can be better than that? It sounds great, but the players are the ones having to really go through that and having to buy into that. Another week of just grueling work for them. It's a hard sell for the players, but as fans, I'm sure who doesn't want to see more football? So Joe Burrow touched on it a little bit more from his previous tweet that he brought up a few weeks ago. He appeared on Barstool's Pardon My Take podcast, on which he brought up the idea again, or they brought it up to him. And this time he suggested that every team in the NFL, that all teams have their normal bye week, obviously scheduled how they do currently in the NFL. Nothing different about that. But the second bye week will be around week 13, I want to say that they suggested, that Joe Burrow mentioned, and it would be around week 13. That would be everybody's bye week, so everybody would just kind of have off for that week. No football, no nothing that week, like the All-Star break, like the NBA All-Star break, like the MLB All-Star break, and things like that. Then, along those lines, obviously, if you're going to go off of the mold of them, he suggested bringing the Pro Bowl in during that week as well, and really, copy the NBA, the MLB, the MLS as well, of these American sports leagues that have a league-wide bye week pretty much halfway through the year, and they bring in their Pro Bowl there. They do all the extra games and special events and things like that. And it is an interesting suggestion. That was really the biggest point that Joe Burrow made this time around when he brought it up again. And obviously the idea is to provide more rest, a much needed rest if you're going to play 18 games. I'm sure that's going to be something that the players will want to have at this point in time. If they're going to have another game added on, it's almost a guarantee that you're going to have another bye week, but how you schedule it and where that goes will be the biggest point of it, because I don't think you can schedule 2 bye weeks and have them scattered like they already do with 1 bye week. I think that already takes enough planning and enough schedule gymnastics to actually make it work. And now if you want to add more international games and things like that and expand it even more, it's going to be even more of a nightmare to figure out travel schedules and home games versus away games, and then adding in a bye week for all these games, adding another week on top of that as well. It gets to a point where if you want to schedule 2 scattered bye weeks, it's almost impossible, at least from what I can think of it, for anybody that makes the NFL schedule to do it that way. So it almost makes the most sense now to have 1 bye week for everybody to be off. And to include the Pro Bowl in that, I don't think is the worst idea, because the NFL has tried multiple alternatives to the Pro Bowl, or just different iterations of the Pro Bowl. Now they've included flag football to it as the final event. You still have the various skill games and events that they do as well, switching it to flag football and things like that, things of that nature. Doing all these things that they feel, the NFL really feels, I think, that they're really doing things like, they're really doing something by adding these different sort of things. But again, the reaction to it when the Pro Bowl is closer to the Super Bowl, I think it's just, it's not getting any better. And at this point, I don't think it'll hurt to try this out, to at least get some reaction, because they've already, like I mentioned, tried different alternatives to this, and it's just gotten the same reaction. It seems like nobody wants to watch it. It's almost like everyone's dreading it at this point. When the Pro Bowl's coming, if somebody mentions it to you, you're like, oh, like, all right, like, I'm not going to watch it, but that's cool, I guess. Like, no one's actually wanting to watch the Pro Bowl like people are wanting to watch the Home Run Derby. The NBA All-Star Game's getting to that point, if not already there. So the NFL has to try and do something to change that narrative. At this point, again, I don't think it'll hurt to try that out. And also, maybe having it during the actual middle of the season, during the actual regular season, right when we're getting into the thick of things, and right in the middle of the season where playoff implications are getting tighter, more high-stake games. You take a break from all of that, and you head into the Pro Bowl for some of these players. Maybe you still have the creative juices flowing. Maybe you still have that competitive edge. Maybe these games, flag football, turns into a lot more competitive and a lot more of an entertainment thing if these players aren't off of their vacations, having to come into Hawaii or Florida, wherever the Pro Bowl is taking place. They have to take a break from what they're doing. They have to go there, participate in it, and it's like, all right, whatever, we're going to do it. Let's just get it over with. Instead, you have it during the season. It could be a pain for some people to find it annoying if they do it, but I think you at least get more emotion doing it this way. At least you get more of a competitive, actual emotion coming out rather than a group of guys that's just out there going through the motions. But that's just me. I haven't watched the Pro Bowl in a long time, so I don't see the harm in at least trying this out. I will be interested to see if they try and replace where the Pro Bowl is now, currently a week or two before the Super Bowl, I want to say. If they schedule anything there, or if they try to include another event in place of where the Pro Bowl used to be, if they have it during the actual regular season, that's something I'm interested in seeing, if the NFL adds something to that. But I'd anticipate some pushback from the players, like I mentioned before, some being annoyed of the fact that they are competing in these silly games, flag football, in the middle of trying to compete for the playoffs for some of these teams. But like I mentioned, with the season coming to a close, coming to an end, more attention, I think, will be on the revenue share and the offseason changes rather than this bye week. But I anticipate some pushback from the players. I won't really imagine that they're too happy about it. But with that being said, it is a big problem. It is a big situation that the NFL should try to correct, because it seems like they're doing everything else right, expanding the game to different countries, getting more eyeballs watching it. Streaming platforms are going crazy for the NFL. They got that deal with Netflix now. It seems like they're doing everything right except this Pro Bowl situation that they just can't figure out. I don't see a problem with them trying it out. I think they should take Joe Burrow's suggestion under real consideration, because it seems like they can't come up with anything better. So that's what Joe Burrow said. I'm a fan of it. Why not try it out? If they get this right, the NFL would be in a great place right now where everything is just going right for them, if it does turn out to be a hit. But let me know what you guys think on Joe Burrow's idea of having the Pro Bowl halfway through the year, and the idea of just having a league-wide bye week as that second bye week as well. Leave your guys' thoughts in the chat box and in the comments section after this episode. But with that being said, that'll wrap it up for this show of the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. I want to thank you guys for joining me on today's show, and please remember to like, follow, and subscribe to the show, as well as following the network on all forms of social media. If you want to see more of this show, check out both YouTube channels, the Podcast Network channel and the GSMC Sports Network channel, for different forms of media around the NFL, different forms of content on both of those channels. As a final reminder, tune in every weekday at 6:30 p.m. Eastern Time for more discussions and conversations around the NFL with me, Manny Maradiaga, as your host. Thanking you for joining me on today's show, and I hope to see you guys back here with me again tomorrow.
Let's go. I wake up to a little bit of drool on my pillow, feel like it's gonna be a bad day. Yeah, I'm tired of shit, and the coffee ain't hit yet, damn ain't